there's a cloud in this sheet of paper. Can you see it? No? No? There's a cloud here because without a cloud, there would be no rain. And without the rain, there would be no trees. And without trees, we could not make this piece of paper. These aren't my words. These are the words of someone much more poetic than I, but I think it's a beautiful concept and one that I try to manifest in my work as a visual storyteller and information designer. I'm fascinated by the ways that we can connect these everyday experiences, writing on a piece of paper, drinking a cup of coffee, flicking on a light switch. How can we connect these everyday experiences to social and environmental issues, the world around us? After all, everything has a story behind it. And I think it's important to make those stories visual and tangible so that we can interact with them. I'm fascinated by this idea that we are endlessly tied to the world through these small daily things that we consume. And the aim throughout my work is to inspire ownership, to inspire us to understand our role in global environment and change. After all, when we pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. And this is especially true, I think, when we talk about sustainability. Striving for that balance of social, environmental, and financial issues, it's a challenge. Sustainability is a hugely complex topic, and it's a tangled network, you could say, everything being related to each other. And when we talk about sustainability, as everyday consumers, we're surrounded by bad news. Global warming, landslides, all kinds of catastrophe are out there, and it's hard to understand how we as individuals can have any kind of change. How can we have an impact within this environment? Fortunately, there's a lot of data being collected related to sustainability. Increasingly, we can track and trace things at minute, real-time levels and the finest level of detail. Unfortunately, this data alone, it's not enough. We need to find ways to connect to people on another level. I think Plato has said it very well, that human behavior flows from three main sources: desire, emotion, and knowledge. So now that we have the knowledge behind all of the data available, I think we need to spend a little bit of time and try to figure out how we can drive some of that extra emotion to supplement the knowledge. And I think that emotion is how we can then connect people to their own desires to change behavior toward more sustainable futures. So how do we do this? Well, I very much believe in the power of stories. I think stories can emotionally connect us like none other. And in my line of work, I focus on the visual side of stories. Visual stories are not anything new. They've been around for quite a while. For example, you know those stained glass windows in Gothic churches? They were originally conceived not only to make the churches look nice, but also to help remind people of the stories behind the Bible. The illiterate parishioners had to remind them of what they were being preached to in church. So these days, we use a lot of visual stories for other topics as well, to encourage memorization, but also these visual stories can transcend language barriers, which is important in as we become more of a global society. Another powerful aspect of visual stories is that they can help us avoid the mental barriers that we throw up when it comes to sustainability. In the sustainability world, the communication of sustainability has really struggled with this for a long time. There's been a lot of finger pointing, you really should recycle, or why don't you take the bike instead of driving so much? These kinds of things put a bit of shame to the audience, and unfortunately, that just means that people throw up their barriers. There's a lot of power behind visual stories also because they communicate context. And I think this is especially important for communicating sustainability because sustainability is such a complex issue, and we need to find ways to draw that thread between individual objects and the whole system that's out there. So if you've ever played with one of these kids' toys, it's a learning game. It's the idea that here's the frog, and this is where the frog lives, or here's the horse, and this is the horse's context. So I think as adults, let's take some inspiration from this and figure out ways to have fun with understanding more about sustainability. And over 65% of the population are said to be visual learners, so this is a great opportunity for the idea of visual storytelling. So in my own work, in fact, this really came to fruition during my Fulbright in 2004 in the Netherlands, where I was researching ways to visually explain the life cycles behind products for sustainability communication objectives. And I started with chocolate, because everybody loves chocolate, right? It's also a product that has a lot of social and environmental issues behind it, and at the time there was already a lot of information about the sustainability behind chocolate. So what I did here is put all of the information, but in a life cycle format, so that it becomes a mini story, and you can start to understand not just the origin of the cocoa, but how it's traveled, how it's been processed, all through its full life cycle. And what I think is interesting within these kinds of visual stories is that within this life cycle, we can start to put the detailed sustainability information. So, for example, eco-labels. There's a lot of eco-labels out there. But I think the problem with eco-labels is that they're taken out of context. Eco-labels tend to certify one or a couple parts of the full life cycle behind a product. And the visual stories enable us to see the context of the whole background and understand how that eco-label may touch one particular point. So I've done this for a lot of different types of products. Actually, my objective is to see the visual stories behind everything. So realizing that this would take a really long time, I've recently been working on a project where I've partnered with some very smart people where we're using machine learning to pull existing information on sustainability from all the places it lives. So corporate social responsibility reports, SEC filings, eco-label information, all kinds of sustainability data, and automatically generate labels and posters that we can put on packaging, put it in stores, and also build a website that helps people search and find information on the backstories of sustainability. And what's really exciting about this is, with the opportunity of machine learning, is that it also enables us to start to identify what are the most important aspects to look at for a particular product. So, say for example, coffee. The most important idea for sustainability of coffee is going to be entirely different than it would be for shoes. So we can start to look at each type of product and show what's important for sustainability behind that product. So a lot of the work I do is about mapping these visual stories behind products, but there's also another approach to this visual storytelling, and that's starting from the data first. Have any of you seen these bike counters around? There are a few places in the world, and I think they're starting to slowly be placed in some of the larger cities here in the US. I think they're fascinating. This idea that you can count the number of cyclists that have passed one point. So this is already a good piece of data, and it's a good indicator for sustainability, just sort of celebrating and showing that this many cyclists are out there and have passed this point. But I think it takes things out of context. It doesn't give a clear idea of what that means. What does it mean that 5,436 cyclists have passed this one point today? So that, tied with some other research that's being done on clean air quality and what that translates to in terms of savings for society. I worked with a small group, and we put together connected a bike counter to an animated graphic that counts the number of cyclists passing, but also shows what that means in terms of savings for the individual, but also for the full collective, the number of people that have passed this particular point. And we also tracked with information graphics how much gasoline was saved by those people too. So this ended up, it was a project done both in Sweden and in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and it ended up collecting a lot of numbers of cyclists and a lot of interest, because it puts these ideas into context. So I just want to wrap up by saying, I've told you already about the cloud in this piece of paper, and hopefully it's clear to you now, the idea that we can't have paper without the trees behind it, and the trees need rain, and so on and so forth. But now I'd like us to start seeing the clouds behind everything, because everything in the world has nature as its far back original origin, and we're endlessly tied to all of these things through our small daily interactions, and at the end of that, global environment and society. Thank you.